both in terms of political, economical, but also physically as well with the planet. But the last one, and this is probably the one that we try and work most with people, is this idea that change is constant, and context is variable. It's this idea that change is always happening. So what we try and help people to really focus on is trying to figure out what the context is around the environment that they're in. Yeah? So your context here is Leicester. What does this mean to you in this particular situation?
Of course, there is Arthur C. Clarke's comment, isn't it? The only permanent thing is change.
Yeah. And it's quite, we found this really helpful because some people ask us when these changes are going to happen, and it's kind of we don't know when that change is going to happen, but it's the fact that it's probably the petrol motion anyway. So that's kind of the issue. Okay, so that's all kind of the ideas behind what we're doing. What do we actually produce? What do we actually do? This was the first, if you like, physical publication that we did back in 2006, and this was funded internally. So this was work that we put together, funded internally, and we made 7,000 of them, and just put them onto the internet. And we obviously told people that we were seeing that they were there, and we spoke to people about it. But we did end up doing 4 print runs, which we just completely didn't expect to do. We thought they'd be used internally by a few people, but there was some people seemed to kind of get hold of the idea of this format, having issues. And the thing that I've observed with people as well is they actually don't look at the detail on the card. What they do is they hold the card, and it's almost like a token to say this is an issue because it's being printed. Therefore, it's not just my opinion, it's actually there's something real here. And that's kind of quite a curious phenomenon, but it's helped to sort of drive discussions around what the drivers might be.
Sorry, I got a copy of that years back, and I think the one thing that stopped people was there was an ability to compartmentalise many of the problems they were bumping into. One of the real issues that I've got is behavioural change. And it's difficult to say how behavioural change is stacked, because everyone, I'd have to say, Arup is probably one of the greatest culprits in this, is that you focus on the built environment, the physical structure, the tangible, and then the other side of the coin is the intangible, and yet people never quite understand how to approach the intangible. Give an engineer a nut and bolts and he's seventh heaven, but actually ask him how other people see the nut and bolt, then he kind of stumbles a bit.
Yeah.
So the first time that ever came out, and I got a copy in 2007, was actually compartmentalised how people could approach the problem that's staring them in the face.
Yeah, unfortunately, I agree completely. When I joined Arup, I'd come from an environment, automotive retail, where the feedback loop from how people use what you do is almost instantaneous. You continue getting feedback. And I came to the built environment assuming that that when the architects and designers created the concept, they came and actually did the design, you had the construction phase, and people came in. I thought that they would then start to say, right, did it work? But you're right, typically as an industry, we don't come back in and say, did it work?
Because the prime example was the Dome in London. When it first came out, it was either university hated or loathed in equal measure. Now nobody worries about it, because at the time that the public perceptions around something so strange was actually ruffling their feathers. And I was surprised they didn't try and smooth the feathers before they built it. But that was really the opening saga for me, is that just because what you do you think is a great idea doesn't necessarily mean to say it's the right idea. There are many versions of right which we have to respect.
Absolutely. And the reality is that your view of right is potentially going to be different to my view of right. I think I'm certainly seeing there's certainly an increasing desire to get more immediate feedback as to the things that we're creating and how they've worked. So purely from a kind of a very pragmatical sort of behavioural perspective. Are the things that we're designing working in the way that we anticipate? Because that's the first step to understand. But also at the macro scale as well, I think that you're talking about, it's a really important issue. And things like, with the M1 widening, for example, the reason why I showed that was partially because of some of the efforts that we're trying to make to actually engage people with the reasons why things are being designed. Because, a base assumption, I think, for something would be this, why are we creating more road? Should we be trying to remove cars from the road and put investment into public transport? And there's actually, we would say, yes, please, can we do that? Because that's where we believe that from at a bigger scale, you get the real benefits. However, there's design reasons as to why those choices are being made. If they can't be conveyed to people and explained, then I think you're right, the kind of the behavioural stuff starts to fail. So in some ways, this is what we're trying to, we're trying to put these cards out there to sort of enable those conversations to start. But it actually wasn't done for that particular purpose. So that's kind of one of the side effects that we're trying to now figure out. How do we start to be able to do that a bit more proactively rather than individuals?
Because again, if you do most of the sort of project management tools, Prince2 prime example, it doesn't have anything in Prince2 about user behaviour, but user perceptions. It's all about just-in-time delivery, etc., etc.
Great comment. I'll keep that in mind. So where do those 50 drivers come from? We've done a whole bunch of workshops with different kinds of groups, Office of the Future, School of the Future, Hotel already mentioned. And what we started to notice was that whatever sector we were looking at, or the group of people that we were working with, there were some sort of common threads that started to come out. And that's kind of what starts to inform some of the issues that we've called out as being the big ones. We also, in terms of the process within those workshops, we would do things like, and a bit, I'll pull this out of a different presentation, but the image at the top left there shows a foursquare with two axes. And what we've chosen there is two different forces. So this is, the next axis here is global governance, and this is from being kind of cohesive on the left side to divergent on the right, I think. And then the economic growth is positive and negative. And the purpose of taking two things like that is to take two sort of big issues or factors that affect the environment that you're working with, and then to put them onto this foursquare. And then suddenly you've got four very different worlds if you look at the combination of those two axes. So the Block Islands one here is all about increased economic growth, but probably sort of more divergent, actually, divergent global governance. That's what, and then what we start to do is to think about that situation, and then start to build up a plausible future around that particular environment. And what this forces people to do is pretty much everybody in this room. If I put those axes up, and we do this quite a lot. If I put those axes up and said to everyone in this room, okay, draw a dot where you think we are today, and where we're going to tomorrow. Sorry, in 20 years' time, you would probably all have quite different perceptions as to how you think that we would fit on that diagram. So what this allows you to do is to pull out people's official futures. So first of all, you understand what people's official future is, where they think that we're going, but then you force them to think about the other three worlds that might exist. People find that quite hard often because they're having to think about scenarios that they don't believe in. They don't believe we'll never, The classic one here is with the airline industry. 3 or 4 years ago when we did this, we had a number of flights increasing or decreasing. And nobody from the industry believed there was ever going to be any decrease in flights. So at that time the industry was very optimistic. They just couldn't get enough flights out there. Everybody wanted it. Did the same event with some people at the Institute of Civil Engineers this year, and everybody was on it's all declining. Flights are just plummeting. I was kind of, wow, only 3 years, how can it be so different? So it gets people thinking about the different worlds that might exist. This is just data from the first 3 years that we were doing this, and it kind of shows the variations that people had in this particular theme. I'll skip that a little bit. The other side that we do is, so you mentioned the STEEP analysis. The STEEP stands for social, technological, economic, environmental, and physical. And this again forces people to think about drivers or issues that maybe they wouldn't normally comfortably think about. So for example, I'm perfectly happy looking at technological drivers